All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode 44 of the Mike the New Haven podcast, episode 44, Reggie Jackson number of this podcast. If you haven't heard the previous episode with my old college buddy, Marvin McIntyre, check it out. We did a preview of the 2020-2021 NBA season. This is really cool for me as a longtime baseball fan and as a writer. My next guest is a longtime baseball insider, a field reporter for Fox Sports since 2005. He is also a senior analyst at the MLB Network, where you can often catch him providing reports there on the latest developments around the league. A seasoned writer as well, he has previously worked for the Baltimore Sun, Sports Illustrated, and Sporting News, and since August of 2017 has been the senior baseball writer for The Athletic, where through a subscription you can find his stories and the stories of many more great writers, as my toy poodle, my fur nephew, makes noise in the background. It is none other than Ken Rosenthal, who joins me now on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Ken, nice to have you. How are you?
Thanks, Mike. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. So we'll get right into it. People know, obviously, Ken Rosenthal, the baseball writer, a baseball insider as well, of course, but have never really taken the time, I feel, to check out just who Ken Rosenthal, the guy, really is. And so why don't you tell us about your backstory? You're a native of Long Island, Oyster Bay to be exact. Take me through your early years, if you don't mind.
Mike, you've done your work. You've done your research. I did grow up in Oyster Bay, actually the town next to it, East Norwich. Family started in Queens. We moved to that part of Long Island when I was about 6. I was in first grade. And normal upbringing there. I had a sister, went to high school, and from there went to the University of Pennsylvania. I had back surgery my senior year of high school, and I actually had a chance to go to Northwestern's journalism school, but that was Chicago. And because I was starting college in a body cast, like neck to waist, I didn't want to go far away. So that was a big reason I chose Penn. And also they had a great daily newspaper. So from there, I knew I wanted to be a sports writer pretty much right away in school. I had a choice of sports or news, and the cooler kids were in sports. I went to sports and then knew I wanted to work for a newspaper one day. And that was my only goal: work for a newspaper, cover a beat with a major professional sports team. Now, it didn't happen right away. I started in York, Pennsylvania. I applied to 75 papers, rejected by everyone except the one in York, because my college friend, John Delapina, was there, and he helped me get there. Spent about a year there, about 2 years from there in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. The Camden Courier-Post was the paper's name at the time, and then went to Baltimore. At 24 years old, I went to cover the Orioles for the Baltimore Evening Sun, and that paper no longer exists. But that's how it all started.
John Delapina wrote for the New York Rangers. Wrote on the New York Rangers for many years.
Very good, Mike. Yep.
He's working for the NHL now.
The NHL.
Yep.
He's a big-time guy, NHL public relations.
Yep, definitely. So growing up in the New York area, you were exposed to a lot of great writers, as you alluded to. I mean, names like Mike Lupica, Jimmy Breslin, the late, great Pete Hamill, who just passed away recently, Dave Anderson, and the late Dick Young come to mind. Was there any particular writer whose style you would say you were looking to emulate?
Initially, Lupica. I would say that's a great call. And I think we all idolized him at that time. He was the young star of the New York Daily News. He was their columnist. And in fact, Mike, when I posed for my college headshot, Mike Lupica had one where he was kind of looking up. And I kind of did the same thing for the college paper. I tried to, that's how I tried to emulate him. Couldn't do it writing-wise, right? So why not do it with your headshot? But that was the guy for me. I also loved Peter Vesey, who covered the NBA for the Post. And not so much – I loved all the sports. It wasn't like I liked the NBA better than baseball or the NHL better than this or not. It was pretty much all the same to me, but I just loved Vesey's writing. And those were two guys for sure. Dick Young was a little bit before my time. Dave Anderson was the great Pulitzer Prize winner for the New York Times. We all respected him, but Lupica was the guy, I would say.
No, he was the guy for me, too. I grew up reading his books in grade school. I still read Shooting from the Lip in the Daily News, and obviously I grew up watching the sports reporters on ESPN, so he's a big influence on me, too. You interned at Newsday for a little bit on Long Island before you embarked on your career. So what were some of the key lessons there during that internship that you would say still guide you today as a writer?
It's a good question. I worked 2 summers there. The first summer, I strictly did agate. which is putting together the box scores. Now it's all automated. You don't have to worry about it. But then you had to sit at a computer and put in like 20 commands to make sure the box score was suitable for the newspaper. So that was on deadline. I worked 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. On that. And basically, I learned the pressure of a newspaper, what it's like on deadline. I would dream those commands for a long time because it was nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And then I guess from there, I learned just to be persistent, because my second summer, there were 2 other writing interns, and both were, I thought, more polished maybe than I was, or at least it seemed like the management liked them better than me, maybe because I had been the Aggie clerk the summer before. I had started younger. And Tom Verducci was 2 years ahead. And he had been the intern 2 years ahead, and no one was going to match him then or now. So he was kind of the standard, and I kind of had to fight my way to get stories then. And then after that, that second summer, I tell this story a lot. The sports editor was gracious enough to talk to me about my future. I was now a senior in college. What was I going to do? He basically told me, listen, man, maybe you should go to law school. You're not quite there. And he wasn't mean about it, but he was blunt. And I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to go to law school. So I just went about my way and, like I said, applied to 75 papers, got a job at one, and went from there. And hey, that all drove me. The fact that I thought in my mind, it probably wasn't even true, that they favored these other 2 guys. They seemed to be higher on them. And the fact that the one guy told me, hey, man, he basically said, I don't think you can do this. And that did motivate me for sure.
Well, it turned out to be the right decision to stay the course, and because I mean, look where you are now, and good. I mean, hey, people revere that kind of quality in a person, because I mean, look, The Last Dance. One of the things that was celebrated about The Last Dance, amongst many other details in it, was Jordan's perseverance in the earlier portion of his career. The things he was told as a youngster that served to motivate him, and to achieve the great things he went on to achieve. So you mentioned wanting to be on a beat, and you did get that opportunity with the Baltimore Sun for 13 years, 1987 to 2000, covering the Orioles. So here are some of the things that transpired over the 13 years you were there with the franchise, covering them. Some mediocre seasons, yeah. Some back-to-back ALCS appearances in 1996 and 1997, losing both times to the Yankees and the Cleveland Indians. And ownership changed, the opening of Camden Yards in '92, and Cal Ripken's pursuit of history with his now iconic games played streak. So that's quite the list of things to have been sort of present for and front and center for. So looking back, how would you describe those 13 years on the Baltimore beat and its impact on you?
Well, I grew a lot during that time. Now, the first 4 years were the years I actually was on the beat. Then after that, I was a sports columnist. Now, I did a lot of Orioles, so I would expect a lot of people would describe it just like you did. You did the Orioles for 13 years. It wasn't quite true. The Ravens came.
Yeah.
I did University of Maryland. I did some other things as well, did Olympics and Super Bowls and all of that.
Yeah.
But Orioles were the heavy focus. Now, I learned so much. Initially, it was just learning how to do the beat. And I had 2 great guys to show me the way and kick my butt at the same time. It was Tim Kirkjian and Richard Justice. Tim was then with the Baltimore Morning Sun. Richard was then with the Washington Post. And Tim taught me not just how to cover the team, but kind of how to respect the game and respect the players and understand how difficult the game was to play. Because when we're sitting watching TV or even sitting in the press box, it's easy to think, man, come on. You should have made that play. It's a hard game to play.
Yeah.
And you never, ever, in my mind, should lose that understanding when you're writing about baseball. So that was one big thing. And then over the years, once I became a columnist, I kind of had to learn to find a voice. And really, I'm still trying to do that the best I can. I would say initially I was somewhat like a pitcher who could throw only fastballs and fastballs at the head. I didn't have much subtlety to my game.
Yeah.
But over time, I tried to develop that, and those were great years. We had an amazing staff, Mike. We had I would say it was an all-star team.
Mhm.
Back then, a lot of newspapers had all-star teams.
Oh, yeah.
That's where all the writing talent was. And when I was a columnist, John Eisenberg was the other sports columnist. He is a guy who's written some great books since. Mark Hyman was our investigative sports reporter. He is now the head of the University of Maryland Sports Journalism Department.
Mhm.
We had Mike Litwin, who was a columnist, who just was a brilliant writer. A ton of people that were really accomplished. Buster Olney. Buster Olney was a beat guy for the Orioles while I was a columnist. So I could go on and on, honestly, and people on the news side too. Laurel Lippman became a best-selling mystery writer. David Simon, I think everybody knows who he
Oh,
is.
yeah.
He was the police reporter.
Homicide,
So,
Life on the Street, and The Wire.
yep, that's exactly right. And that's where it all started for him. So it was quite something to be part of that staff at the time. I don't know that we all realized it, but I look back kind of with pride, man. I was part of something pretty good.
Yeah, that's definitely cool. And in the 13 years you were there, you were named Maryland Sports Writer of the Year 5 times. So, I mean, I think you kind of touched on it. I guess you would owe that kind of success to the good people you had around you and your tenaciousness as well. Would it be fair to say?
Yes, and also, honestly, Mike, Maryland is a small state.
Mhm.
Baltimore Sun was the biggest paper. It makes sense that the columnist for the Baltimore Sun would win that award. There weren't that many people who voted on it. It was just, I don't know, 20 of us maybe. So all awards to me are they're nice when you win them and you respect the honor and you feel proud, but at the same time, you have to understand what they are. And that's not why any of us do this. It just isn't. So it was a great time. It was also during that period, got married, had 3 kids, and really started everything there. And I never imagined at that time being the guy that I am now. In fact, I kind of thought I'd be there forever. And it just didn't work out that way. The business changed, things changed at the paper, and I decided to move on.
The newspaper business, people think that the decline is recent. You can go back to the 90s and look at some of the things that were starting to change, not for the better of the business. I mean, it's sad, but look at the Daily News. The Daily News, I could have bought the Daily News. It sold for $1.
Right.
Which is really unfortunate. But it kind of segues perfectly into my next question, because The Athletic came calling for you in the summer of 17. You'd been at Fox Sports doing their writing for Fox Sports in addition to covering games for them, which you still do. And then they moved away from writing and they pivoted to video, and then The Athletic opened up. You were writing solo for a while. I remember a tweet you had where you had a column, I believe, on Facebook, and you said, "You can be my editors."
Right. Well, often my readers are my editors. They point out stuff. But in that particular case, actually, I had friends of mine who would editor friends, and they would read the stuff, and they did it kind of anonymously, just as a favor to me. And that, I don't know how long that went for, maybe a couple of months. That was it
Not too long.
before I went to The Athletic. Yeah.
And so I'll ask you, it's blossomed. It's kind of a 2-part question, and we're talking with Ken Rosenthal, a noted baseball insider and columnist here on the Mike the New Haven podcast, episode 44. The Athletic has really blossomed in the short time it's been there. The format's different. It's come on like gangbusters. There's bureaus for different cities, and it really appeals to many sports fans because there's still that hometown beat feel, as opposed to a national one. So first things first, before I ask you about what you've enjoyed the most about working there, how did the opportunity to join open up for you?
Well, it's interesting. So while I was at Fox, I had interviewed at one point with Sports Illustrated, and I wasn't going to leave there unless 3 different things happened or so. It would have taken a combination of events because I wanted to stay on TV, and I would have had to, I don't know how that would have worked. Fox was not going to let me write for Sports Illustrated and not write for their website while being on their network. So
Right.
The editor was a guy named Paul Fichtenbaum, and we had a great conversation. I met with him and a few other editors, and it was I had a really good feel after that. I felt good about that guy, and I felt good about all of those people. So you lose touch with folks, and you just kind of move on, and I did. And then The Athletic was starting around that time where I lost the job at Fox, where Fox eliminated the writers, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul Fichtenbaum was the editor. He had left Sports Illustrated to go run this thing. At the time, I think they were in 4 or 5 cities. It was San Francisco, Chicago, Toronto, and Detroit. I think those were the 4. And there was no way of knowing whether it would work out, but I had a good feel for Paul. As I said, I liked him and I felt good about him. And I didn't really have great opportunities elsewhere. There were a couple of things that I might have done, but I wasn't in love with them. And the Athletic, to me, was something that was a big risk. But at the same time, I had two TV network jobs, Fox and MLB Network. So I was lucky enough. My kids had all graduated from college at that point, so that was done. I was lucky enough to take a chance. I was in a position where I could take that risk. And I felt it was a reasonably good risk. And I often go back, not often, but once in a while, I go back and look at the first thing I wrote for The Athletic. And I wrote in that introductory explanation for why I was doing this, I said, The Athletic is daring to be great, and that's a good place to start. And actually, Mike, that's what's happened. We dared to be great. It exploded in a way that I never even imagined. I never imagined initially we'd have a baseball beat writer for every team. It wasn't even conceivable. Every city. Now we're down. We don't have one in Tampa Bay and Miami now, but for a while we did. So every city, that's right. And it's incredible to me what has happened, not just in baseball, but of course across the company. Now, you touched on what I like most about it. It's easy. What I like most is being part of a great team. And I've had that at times. I alluded to it earlier. At the Baltimore Sun, I was part of a great team. At Fox Sports, when we have our postseason team together, it's different than the regular season. Our postseason team, that's an all-star team. And not just Joe Buck and John Smoltz, all of the technical people, cameramen, anybody you can imagine, audio, producers, directors. These are the best in the business. It's thrilling to work with them. And at The Athletic, just in my little corner in baseball, it's kind of the same way. I get to work with Jason Stark and Katie Strang and Andy McCullough and Mark Carrig and Britt Garoli. I can name all these people. Lindsay Adler, who covers the Yankees. And that to me is so satisfying. And also because of my age, and I've done this a long time, I'm in sort of a semi-mentor, semi-leadership position. So I can help people. And I like doing that. So it all really came together great for me. And at the time, Fox made their decision. I was crushed. And I sort of knew it was coming, but I was still crushed. The writing decision, to pivot to video. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes things work out for the best, even better than you had it before. And I would say that with The Athletic, that has happened.
Oh, I would agree with you. I promised I wouldn't keep you long. So before we get to the concluding segment, I do want to ask you, this year has been strange on a lot of levels. That's well known. Covering the postseason, particularly the LCS and the World Series in this pandemic with the spread out fans in Texas and that whole situation. How odd was that and surreal was that to cover this postseason?
The oddest part was quarantining for 8 days before
I
ever got out. So what we did, I went to the hotel in Texas that was the hotel where the team stayed, where everyone in that quarantine bubble stayed. And the first 8 days, I had to stay in my room. I could go out for an hour a day, walk outside, and that was it. And the reason for that was so everybody would be in this bubble and seemingly not a threat to anyone else from a physical standpoint, from a health standpoint. I was actually happy to do it because I hadn't been around a player or team the whole season. We hadn't been close to them. We'd just been doing Zoom calls. And this was my way of getting back on the field, back to being in a position to interview players, socially distanced with masks. But that was at least much better than before. So that part of it, I guess, was the strangest. And just the lack of freedom overall inside that bubble. You really couldn't do much except hotel, ballpark, hotel. It was kind of weird. The meals were given to you and that whole deal. But covering the games themselves, that was normal. The games were fun. And when the fans got there for the LCS, they weren't there for the division series, then it became even more normal. So until that last night, when Justin Turner tested positive, things went pretty smoothly.
Yeah, well, I would say so. And then Mr. Turner made some rather questionable decisions. So that said, it is now time for the concluding segment of this podcast because you got some news to pursue. See if I'm a Yankee fan, so I'm hoping you can figure out what's going on with LeMahieu. I'm hoping he stays. Bauer, the whole spiel there. It is now time for a segment of this podcast called Rapid Fire. 5 hit and run questions from me and 5 answers from you. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay. So first, favorite coworker you've ever had, and you can say multiple.
That's a great question. I got to go rapid, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Katie Strang, Joe Strauss, Jason Stark, John Eisenberg.
Okay. Second, favorite player you've ever covered?
Pedro.
Pedro Martinez. Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a character. Third, funniest player you've ever covered? I guess Pedro too, right?
Well, Pedro could be on that list. There's many others, though. Mike Flanagan was a really funny guy, a dry wit.
Yeah, the late Mike Flanagan, who passed away a few years ago. Fourth, favorite thing to do during your downtime?
This might sound a little weird, but I love watching live music videos.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
Fifth and finally, what advice, for example, I'm 20. I'll be 21 pretty soon. What advice would you give any aspiring writers, young people looking to enter the industry?
I get asked this a lot. And it's a difficult question to answer now because jobs are so scarce, and especially with the pandemic, things have shrunken further. What I generally say is be flexible. Be flexible in what you want or are willing to do, whether it's TV, radio, newspaper, podcast, website, whatever is out there, be willing to do any of that. Also, I think it's important, you've got to be flexible geographically. If there's an opportunity in some small place and you think the opportunity might lead to something bigger, you do that. And the other thing, obviously, is work really hard. And it almost goes without saying, but it's still a separator. And the people who work hard can overcome any deficiencies in talent. I think that's one of the things I've done. I don't know that I'm the best writer. In fact, I know I'm not the best writer. There are better writers than me out there. But hopefully by working hard on the reporting end and just in general, I'm able to compensate for that. And I'll give you a recent example of someone who went to a small place and then kind of came up, and that would be Julian McWilliams. You know who he is?
No, I can't say I'm familiar with him.
Covers
Which is
the
my
Red
fault.
Sox. Yeah, covers the Red Sox for the Boston Globe. He's a young guy. He's not someone you necessarily would know. But Julian was a guy I met outside a speaking appearance in Times Square. I don't know what year, and he wanted to get into the business. And he was a hungry guy. And I can't remember his exact path, but I think he first went to a small paper in Connecticut, then maybe South Carolina. There were a couple of stops. And eventually the Athletic hired him to cover the Oakland A's. And he did well. And then the Boston Globe covered him to hire the Red Sox. I don't know that Julian's 30. I don't think he's 30. And he's a guy that he took that hard path. And listen, the danger in doing that is that you'll never get out of one of these small places where you're aspiring to do more. But while not everybody has to take that path, sometimes I think it's the best thing. It kind of humbles you. And like, I never forget that I worked in York, Pennsylvania, my first job. And York, Pennsylvania is not that small a place, but it's a small place.
Right.
And it was hard. It was really hard. And even after that, the paper in South Jersey, which was right outside Philly, bit better place. But all those lessons you learn and all those times you spent in crappy hotels and crappy cars and crappy living conditions,
Yeah.
it makes you appreciate any success that much more.
Right.
Now, that said,
Yeah.
if you can start at the New York Times, start at the New York Times. And some people can.
Yeah, some people get there right out the gate. Well,
Yes.
This has been a great, I promise I keep it brief, and we did. So this has been a great podcast, Ken. I can't thank you enough for coming on and giving me the time. We'll plug some things before we go. For those of you listening, I'm pretty sure you know where to find me by now, but in the event that you don't, and this goes for you too, Ken, you can find me on Twitter at Mike in New Haven, Mike in New Haven, obviously where I live here in Connecticut. You can find the podcast Mic'd, MIC''D in New Haven, for those of you out there that aren't subscribed. quite yet subscribed, leave a 5-star rate review. We're everywhere, including now on YouTube. You can go to my YouTube channel, MC's Audio, MC''S Audio, and find all the podcast episodes, including this one and the future ones ahead on there. I'm pretty sure people know where to find you, Mr. Rosenthal, but in the event they don't, plug yourself.
You can find me on Twitter, Ken_Rosenthal, and lots of people seem to find me and have a lot to say. So
Yes,
that's where to find
yes, they do indeed. And you can read Ken in The Athletic. I'll tweet this link to the episode out tomorrow, and if you'd be kind enough to retweet it, that'd be great, so more people can hear this. And it was a very fun conversation. So, like I said, can't thank you enough for coming on. On behalf of Mr. Ken Rosenthal, I am Mike Colon, and we will see you next time.